Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 13, lucky 13, I guess. I'm not particularly worried about 13, but some people are. Not superstitious around here. I'm here with Ed Frauenheim, and excited to have you around. I think this will be a great conversation. So I know you'll do a better job of kind of giving your intro and bio than I will. So welcome. Let us know who you are.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm glad to be here. So I'm Ed Frauenheim. I'm a writer, speaker, and consultant focused on masculinity matters as well as workplace culture. I was a journalist for many years, later became a content and researcher specialist at Great Place to Work, which is the company behind the Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list. So I got to learn about some of the best cultures, workplace cultures in the world. 2 years ago, I co-authored a book called Reinventing Masculinity, the Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection with Ed Adams. And over the last couple of years, I've been kind of doing my own work as a consultant, speaker, author, and spreading this message of a better way to be, show up as a man and especially at work, but in other parts of our lives as well.
That's awesome. This is going to be great. This is obviously exactly what we're trying to work through. And I'm looking, basically the guests that we have, I'm hoping we just have inspiration, education, my own edification as well. Just trying to get, because how I might define masculinity may be different. And definitely, as you ask men across the world, you're probably going to get multiple definitions. So maybe we should start there. In general, or in as much detail as you want to go, how are we, maybe it just makes sense to just define masculinity in and of itself. I've got kind of a sign behind me that's talking about success redefined and how we are trying to redefine success in our manhood, so to speak. And then I've got another sign that says masculinity is not toxic. Some men just suck. So I know we'll talk a little bit about toxic masculinity and those kind of phrases, but I'm interested in how you would define masculinity.
I would define masculinity as the expectations that are put on men, kind of simply put. Like, how are we asked, expected to show up as guys, and what's possible for us as men? And what my co-author and I have kind of talked about in our book is that for many years, going back thousands of years, we think that you could say masculinity has been a rather confined set of expectations. We've had this conventional, and again, we avoid the term toxic because we agree with you. Men are not toxic. Masculinity itself is not toxic, but we do see a problem in what we called confined masculinity, which is that men have had pretty limited ways of relating to people and limited roles that have been okay for us to play. Some of those include the P's, the provider, the protector, the procreator. And we've been then also expected to be competitive. We've expected to be dominant, to be strong and invincible, and to be kind of emotionally stoic, so that we're not expressing many emotions. And lastly, we're supposed to be self-made men, like self-reliant, almost to the point of isolation. There's a lot of good things in a lot of those expectations, but they also have, they're proving to be harmful and unhealthy, especially in the way the 21st century is unfolding.
Yeah. So so do you see those things as changing for men in terms of like as a general whole, or this is like our mission to help change this in men over time? I mean, I kind of live in Montana, which is more, Old West mentality, kind of that self-reliance kind of thing. And I grew up that way. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm kind of the definition of self-made in that regard. But I think over the years, and I've tried to work through, incorporate it in some of the new things that you're saying.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's an honorable thing. Everything you're describing, the self-made entrepreneur or doing your own business, that's kind of the territory I'm in as well right now. What we have called for or kind of identified is what we call a liberating masculinity, which we see as not necessarily throwing away the older kind of approaches to being a guy, but saying you're free to do more, to
Mm-hmm.
be more as a man. It really fits your maxed out theme, I think, Kevin.
Right, right.
You can have, there's more roles that are okay. Like, for example, caregiving. That's often been seen as women's work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, and acknowledging that we can be more caring fathers, not just the disciplinarian, but even like the primary caregiver, raising the kids as if our spouse, if our wife works. Also more freedom to be kind of a spiritually inquisitive or a spiritual questing man. Those were kind of looked down at in the past, and now we're kind of acknowledging that's cool,
Yeah.
and that actually expands our fulfillment in life. And then in terms of how we relate to people, at work and other places, we can be collaborative besides competitive and always having to
Mm-hmm.
beat somebody. We can be emotionally expressive and kind of wiser about what are the emotions of the people around us. And we can recognize that we're interdependent, not just independent. There's a role for us to be, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps as best we can, but also to acknowledge, we may need help sometimes, and that we are one big human race, one human family that's got to figure out these global problems together. So when you add those things up, it's what we call liberating masculinity, and it really isn't saying there's a problem with men. It's just that men have had to kind of restrict their choices,
Mm-hmm.
and nowadays it allows us to have a fuller, more a freer life, really, and helps free the people around us as well, like our family members, our colleagues at work. So there's a lot of good that comes out of kind of expanding how we can show up as a man.
Yeah, I want to dig into some of those a little bit more. I think I would. I'm wondering though, we're talking about society and opportunity and all of that things. One of the things that I wonder, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, it seems like men are kind of have gradually over the last, I don't know, at least 5 years, we've become kind of the enemy, right? And I think that's where this term masculinity comes from. And so how are you seeing that men are trying to navigate some of this stuff with that in that environment? I often joke with my kids. I have a 24 and 25-year-old girl, young woman, I guess you should say. I'm not allowed to say girl anymore, I was told. So that's
How about when they're 6 and 7? No, that's
yeah.
clearly a girl.
I mean, honestly, my wife is involved in all sorts of female only automotive activities, and they're all girl. That's the name. The names of the organizations are girls. So,
interesting.
But anyway, so I've got these young ladies that are my children, and I always joke with them and say, you have no idea how hard it is to be an upper middle class white guy in America now. So, and I think, that's the joke, but I think there's actually some truth to, being kind of the enemy now of society. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing.
I would say that I agree with what I would call the new pressures we're facing. As I'm similar to you. I'm a 55-year-old white guy, straight white guy, pretty privileged. Grew up in a middle class family outside of Buffalo, New York. Now I'm in San Francisco. But yeah, in the wake of Me Too, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, there's increasing calls for fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's fair to say that historically, white men have had more of the advantages in society.
Oh, totally
in
agree.
Workplaces.
Yep.
And so we're being kind of called on to acknowledge that. And at times, I think the calls and the attitudes can be, hard and sometimes over the top. I've got an 18-year-old child who just recently declared themselves non-binary, grew up female up to this point, and they are very critical of me at times and white guys. And I think, there's I often ask, and I appreciate the folks that give us grace,
Mm-hmm.
as we're trying to navigate this new world. But I think not only are there new pressures, but there are new possibilities. And when we can acknowledge the, not only that we, maybe have had some more advantages than others, but that doesn't mean we haven't worked hard. And it
Right.
doesn't mean we haven't had a lot of pressure on us, including the breadwinner pressure that I felt. I imagine you have felt as well, Kevin. And when we kind of can see ourselves in greater collaboration with, and to kind of acknowledge, yeah, let's help women, let's help folks of color have the same level of opportunity, give and acknowledge the sort of the subtle biases and the less so subtle biases. We can all, and to redefine our definition of success that's more inclusive, it's a happier life for us too. That's what I firmly believe. So I'm curious if how that lands for you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, it's no surprise that, there's definitely benefits to being, a white male in America, right? Like and to be moderately successful and, all of those things. There are definitely some advantages that go with that, but there's also a hell of a lot of hard work that have gone in with that too. And I think now, it's just a difficult time to be that, to be a man and know, okay, well, I'd love to be more loving, be more caring, be more whatever. But in times I feel like in my case, and just what you see, and obviously the media is completely whacked out right now on every possible side, the messages that we hear and the loudness and who's speaking the loudest. But I think it's like, how do we navigate that and how do we make it okay to be a masculine man in its fullness? And I would just, you say, liberated masculinity. And I think that's masculinity in its fullness. You talk about parenting and about men being one of the big things. And I think this is true, through a lot of minority communities, but I think throughout our family units that we have now. If you look at this, the degradation of a two-parent household, it, has a great effect, I think, on what's happening. And I think in most cases, it's the man, the fathers that are no longer active. That seems to be the trend over the last, 4 decades, I guess, maybe even longer than that. But, and that shows that you really need two parents, like we're made to have the male and female influence in our lives, to help us, especially both men, with young girls. I have daughters, which I always joke and say God gave me daughters because he knew that I couldn't handle little boys. There's just something that, dads of daughters, I'm better suited that way. But I know that for a fact that some of the things that the way that they interacted with me growing up, and even the way they interacted now, the way they saw me with my wife, who I've been married to for almost 28 years, the way I treat her, open doors, and all of those expectations on what a man can look like, both good and bad, the challenges. I've apologized thousands of times to my girls for being, over the top or aggressive or, whatever. But it's interesting that now we have moved into the more of it's okay for the father to be at home as the primary caregiver, and I think that's great.
I agree. And I think, generation by generation, we're seeing improvement there. I think there was the expectation for a lot of guys when my dad was around, or his father, was that, you just didn't show affection. You had to be the one who enforced the rules. You were about setting high expectations of behavior, and you were cold often to kids. My dad was in between. He was, affectionate in a lot of ways, but also he had a pretty bad temper at times. And and I think that, I love what you said. You apologize to your kids, because I think that's one of the defining distinctions between our generation. How old are you? I don't want to.
I'm 50. I'm 50.
50. I'm 55. My father, when he was a younger father, never apologized, that I remember. Now he does, but, and I am like you. I apologized to my two kids for all the time, many times, falling down, not being as good of a dad or good of a person as I'd like to be. So I think we're making some progress. And one thing that's been interesting is the pandemic, Kevin. Like the pandemic, which puts so many people working at home. There was some interesting research that men took on more caregiving roles and they don't want to stop.
Yeah.
They have actually come to see that I love being a dad. I want to have a deeper relationship with my kids, besides being a professional. So I think there is a movement toward, an embrace of fatherhood in a fuller way, to your
Yeah.
point about the fullness as a man. That includes all the, like, maybe the roughhousing, the physicality, the sports stuff that maybe guys bring more, but it can include also, like, drawing pictures with your kids or doing a tea party, with girls or boys, or, whatever they want to do, but the full spectrum of how to be a dad.
Yeah, I think that's always something that gets lost sometimes, and that, I found that, and this is why I think it's so important that you have both. I think that there are ways that men interact with kids versus the ways women interact with kids. And usually those ways are much more dangerous or roughhousing or risk oriented, or, you'll see the pictures of dads throwing their kids 10 feet up in the air and, stuff that moms just don't do. But I think that those things are equally as important, whether it be the roughhousing or, whatever across the spectrum, whether it's traditional male type roles, like you're saying with sports and aggressive stuff, or hunting and fishing and guns and whatever, depending on what your basis is. But it's also, I mean, I have pictures of my kids painting my nails when they were, 8 and 9 years old. And like you said, the tea parties, and it's fun because I know Dwayne Johnson, The Rock,
Yeah.
he has little girls, and
Okay.
I'm on his, or I follow him on Instagram, and you'll see pictures of him having his little tea parties. And he had a thing the other day where, and I can't remember how old they are. They're probably 4 or 5. They're little.
Okay.
And he showed this picture where they convinced him to put some sort of makeup on his head. He's got a bald head, but evidently it wouldn't come off. Like, it was this red, and he had to be somewhere, and it was this big thing. But he was talking about how doing that with them and allowing them to spend that time. And this is a guy that is not home, right? Like, the guy works 100 hours a week, but or more. And so he is engaged at those levels whenever he is around. And I think that's a good model to be. I mean, you're talking about a 300-pound dude that, like, just reeks
all
of
muscle.
masculinity, right? And so of traditional masculinity, and then, but to see him then interact with his little kids in that way, I think is super, super cool and super important to have both sides of those. Cause I think it actually brings more to the man than even to the child, or vice versa.
Interesting. That's a great point.
Yeah,
I would say I learned a ton from spending a lot of time with my kids. And I think of, but in some ways, my daughter was the more kind of aggressive sports player. Now my non-binary kid, they just won a city championship in soccer. My son has gravitated toward less competitive activities like snowboarding, or skiing rather for him, surfing, skateboarding, these board sports that are less about dominating others, but about getting better at yourself, and he's one of the most compassionate people. I tell a story in the book about how I made the wrong turn, trying to get out of LA one time, and it's a real mess trying to, like, get through what's called the Grapevine in Southern California. And I just was like, I'm so stupid. I'm just beating myself up. And he said, Dad, everything you are is already enough. He just like, my wife sometimes says that. So he picked it from her, but, like, he just knows how to be kind, and that's not that kind of comforting approach to friends or family is something that I think a younger generation of guys is picking up. And he's still, he's got that fuller spectrum. He's playing, flag football in college and skiing every weekend, but it's a wider way of showing up as a guy that I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah. And were there steps that you took with him in raising him, whether deliberate or, not deliberate, that you and your wife had taken to kind of facilitate where he is? I mean, I've kind of become of the opinion that you do your best, you teach your children, your own ideals, doctrines, and everything else. But at the end of the day, they kind of become who they become, right? Like as they get, and I always joke and say they just you know, in a lot of cases, they'll do the exact opposite of what you thought they were going to do or what you had wished for them to do. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I think that there is definitely a nature part of, I would agree with that. But I think there's a lot to the nurturing, to what the way we, family values, et cetera. I mean, for one thing, we were determined not to hit our kids, not use corporal punishment. We set boundaries and had consequences for when they weren't doing the right thing. But a lot of it was trying to model kindness, and firmness, and apologizing when we screwed up, to your point. And I think there's a lot of good stuff that's been happening in schools around conflict resolution, socio-emotional learning. Like there was, he was getting bullied a little bit in elementary school, and the principal, among others, stepped up to sort of like, stop that stuff, and get kids to talk to each other. They had a ritual they had at this elementary school called Groton Elementary School in San Francisco. Like, I call you to the wall. It's like, I'm going to call you to come talk about this conflict I have with you. And at one point, my son, I remember like one of his best friends was pretty aggressive and shoved him into a garbage can. And rather than like shy away from that kid, retreat, or rather than like retaliate, he said like, you can't do that anymore, Henry. I don't feel safe with you as a friend, and you can't be my friend. We're not gonna be friends if you do this. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't imagine doing that at age like 12 or 13.
Yeah.
You would have been ridiculed for not being tough, but it wasn't, he was being courageous to like call them out, in a non-violent way.
Yeah.
And so I think we did some, parenting that helped push him in this direction, but he also was getting that from his school settings as well.
That's interesting. So this was something they did on an individual basis? Were they teaching this like as a curriculum or anything like that, or counseling?
It was part of the curriculum, I think. And then individually, if there were problems, conflicts, the kids would work it out either themselves with this like ritual, or, we got the principal involved to sort of, look out for our kid a little bit and make sure that he was not going to be bullied. And it won't, later on, he stood up to a bully being mean to other kids.
Yeah.
In middle school, there was a guy that was just being a jerk to some other kids. And my son stood up or spoke up and said, if you were talking to me that way, I wouldn't do what you're asking. He was an upstander, as they say. So, and that's a big way in which I think the masculinity debate is got to be honest about. Like for a lot of years, we accepted pecking orders and bullies at the top of it. If not outright bullies, like, certain ways in which some kids are going to they get all the attention and the props, and a lot of kids getting, the bottom of the pecking order. And I think that we're sort of realizing everyone deserves to be, seen as awesome in their own way.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful about that. I'm curious how that, if you're seeing some similar stuff, Kevin, and what you notice.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Oklahoma, which is kind of Bible Belt South.
Okay.
And I mean, we were, conflict resolution. I come from, my family situation was not great, alcoholics and drug addicts and absence. And so I kind of started raising myself at 7 or 8, kind of,
Wow.
there was adults present, but not very often. And I was around a bunch of kids that were similar. So like, we didn't really have a lot of that taught to us. Violence wasn't a huge part of it. I mean, we had like, I don't know if you're familiar, we played this thing called wall ball, which was basically throw a it's kind of like playing racquetball and dodgeball combined.
I think our kids played that. Okay.
But when we were younger, the penalty part of that was you had to stand up against the wall and let people throw racquetballs at you. So, there was just a different way. And I had been in a couple of altercations when I was younger, and it's one of those things where I fought with a friend of mine and we punched each other in the face, and that was it. That became part of it. I'm not saying that that's the best. That was not necessarily the best approach. But in terms of like bullying and stuff, I always feel like first of all, I'm convinced that all men have low self-esteem. So I think all of us at some point, whether it's the statement that you're an idiot for getting lost in LA, which, anybody can get lost in LA. Even the GPS doesn't work in LA because you got 15 different, highways and all that merging all at one time. It gets you lost in and of itself. But I think all of us have that self-deprecation, that self-esteem issue. And I think from a bullying standpoint, in most cases, what I've known, everybody has a story. And for men, it's his story, right? Or history, or however you want to put that. But I always try to figure out where this kind of behavior is coming from, right? I think I'm sure there's data to support this argument, but I think if you look at bullying behavior, there's always something tragic or challenging behind it. Right. Yeah. And as far as hierarchy goes, I think there's almost always going to be, in my mind, a societal hierarchy. It's just kind of the nature of our Western culture, especially. But I think the important thing that your son is demonstrating, and what I think we can all learn even as adult men especially, is that conflict resolution component of it. That, I've got friends that are multimillionaires, and I've got friends that are dirt, poor, or have different kinds of jobs. We have tons of friends in the labor that are laborers or in the trades or any of that. And I have tons of friends that are, high level entrepreneurs. So financially, there's a little bit of a hierarchy there, right? But like in my mind, I've got friends that are on, major television shows, but they just have a different, cooler, in my mind, it's a cool job. Sometimes it's cooler than my job, but sometimes it's not. So there is this kind of perceived hierarchy, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to connect. And I think that's what that conflict resolution piece is all about, is trying to connect with that person that you're having conflict with and express, hey, this is a challenge, right? Like, I can't be with you. I can't be your friend if you're going to be a dick to me, or, however you want to pull it, so.
That's the phrase that they use. Like, that's a dick move, I think you're right. And one thing I like, I think you're right about the Western civilization piece and the hierarchy stuff there. And I think there's a need to evolve in that regard. Because I think that you can see Western civilization kind of going back to the dawn of agriculture. And there's some interesting kind of anthropology and archaeology research on this, that before agriculture started about 10,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherer societies, the forager societies they had kind of three main principles. They were egalitarian, they were about gratitude, and what was the third one? It's going to drive me crazy. Abundance, I think, it might have been the third one. They and the guys tended to get their sense of self-esteem out of more altruistic behaviors. Serving the community, like bringing home a big kill, of an antelope or something, or mastodon, and, sharing it, and at some point and there was a lot more kind of equal partnership in terms of the religions, in terms of the ways decisions are made between men and women, that kind of got lost in when we went to this sort of, men are in the more public sphere, the economic sphere, and women got kind of pushed to the domestic sphere as agriculture went on. And then we also had some people accumulated a lot more stuff than others did. And I think that you could call, in some ways, the Western culture a hyper masculine culture, where we lost some of the feminine energies or principles like receptivity, kindness, stillness, even versus like go and make more and more stuff, and get all the wealth that you can. These things got out of balance, I would argue. And so this is one of the things we talk about in our book, is that when we're talking about reinventing masculinity, we're kind of saying, let's remember some of the wisdom of some of the 95% of the time we've been on the planet was in these communities where our DNA was shaped, where we are much more about sharing and a much more equal lifestyle, along with just feeling like we have enough. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we don't, as opposed to the sense we have in the modern world, like we always got to get more. So those are some riffs on your point about Western culture and how I think that ties together with masculinity.
Yeah. And I wonder if that is, it'd be interesting to explore agriculture, for example, or being hunter gatherers and those kind of roles. Um, those are, if I'm going to go kill a mastodon or something like that, and I honestly don't know exactly how those hunts went in terms of men, women, that kind of thing. My assumption would be that it was predominantly a male oriented, because there are certain there's a physicality to that activity
Yeah.
that starts to steer society, or continues to steer society towards a particular division of labor, so to speak. If you look at agricultural pursuits back before we had modern machinery, right? Like that's and I know that men and women shared those roles. They just had more defined, because there are activities in agriculture, especially early on, that required a tremendous amount of strength in order to do so. That would push men towards those pursuits. However, if you look at early agriculture, and which has kind of come back around, that women still had roles of, they planting and, tilling, or not necessarily tilling, but the planting and reaping and separating of the wheat and the chaff. And, even in Italian cultures where they would traditionally be the ones stomping the grapes and, all of these, but it became more of a division of labor. And to your point about agriculture and kind of community, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I live in farm country. And if you look at aerial maps of farmland, and it's less defined now because there's more subdivisions and they've taken up the farmlands. But typically, like if you saw you had four huge plots of land from a homesteading standpoint. The houses are at the four corners. They weren't built with the houses in the middle of 1,000 acres. They would have 1,000 acres and all four homes were built in the corner, so that all four homes. And so you had this little mini society that was built for that. And I think that was, in some way, it was so that the wives who were most likely home rearing the children at that time had community, but also the men had community and support after they, if they were out all day farming and doing those things. So I've always found that kind of fascinating, that we want that built-in community.
Right. I think we are deeply social creatures is kind of what the research and I think we're becoming more mindful of that over the last 30, 40 years. One of the theories I've read about why agriculture started more of this clearer division of labor is that the tilling that you mentioned did not work when you're having a horse or an animal or an ox-drawn plow for pregnant women, because it led to miscarriages.
Yeah.
And so it might have been something as simple as that had a pretty big ripple effect. Whereas before, just kind of gardening or not that kind of plowing piece kept more of the traditional communities or the foraging communities as they were. But I think what we've lost in that, what I would call that several thousand years of having more defined in limited masculinity is so much connection to a lot of things. Like you said, we were looking to connect and we've kind of been told we're not supposed to. We're supposed to kind of like be our own person, be our own man. It's not okay to really show our emotions. That's such a human thing to have emotions, but we've been told boys don't cry. And then the homophobia kicks in if you try to have close relationships with your guy friends and say what you're going through. It's easier for us to have relationships with women, about emotions, which isn't bad. But again, it's kind of limited us, and it's taken me a long time to kind of like, and I'm still not kind of all the way a liberating guy, but to kind of realize I'm going to talk to my guy friends about the whole range of stuff I'm experiencing. And I'm so grateful for how some of my friendships have evolved because, back in those earlier adolescent times, it was a lot more surface level. It was a lot more kind of ragging on each other, some, a lot of joy, but again, it was, there was a lot of stress that couldn't really be solved in the kind of relationships I grew up with anyways, with my guy friends.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. And coming from an emotionally wacky past, we'll just call it, I tend to do that, or shove those emotions, down deep inside. And typically I've been married for almost 28 years, I think I said, which is,
congrats on that, by the way.
Thanks. The fact that she hasn't killed me in my sleep is a miracle. But so she gets most of that. Like what I do share, I typically share with her, but I've been thinking more and more as I do more of these podcasts and talk to different people and experts. And I'm actually in the middle of trying to rekindle a friendship that just kind of, like, it really wasn't bad. We didn't have anything, there was a situation to where we kind of, our families went separate ways and kind of moved in different directions. But I was thinking the other day, I'm like, it's been like a decade. And this is one of the people that I admire and enjoy being with most. And so trying to rekindle that friendship, I'm really looking forward to some of those interactions. But having that kind of deeper connection and talking and all that. And I don't know if there's an innate component to men that, or if we've all been taught that we're not supposed to do it, or probably a little bit of both. That's that self-reliant piece, I guess. But we don't like to talk. I think most men don't like to talk to anyone about their feelings. And so, and because then when you have two men who both don't want to talk about their feelings, yeah. you don't get a lot.
Sports.
Yeah. You talk about sports. I'm not a sports guy, but you talk about, in my case, you talk about cars.
Fishing, cars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about cars. Yeah. I'm a big car guy, but it's one of those things where I've over the last probably couple of decades, 10 to 15 years, maybe, I've really tried to, I will say to my friends, hey, I love you, man. Like when we finish a conversation or those kind of things. And I have some friends, some of my closest friends are those that I'm able to, at the very basis of the relationship, right? That's kind of I need to let this guy know that they're important to me and that I genuinely love them and their friendship. And it can be weird, like I have this one friend that he's on the other side of the spectrum of not wanting to have that kind of interaction. He's a little bit older than me. Grew up in a Latino family and those kind of things. So what I have to say with him is, hey, I love you, but not in a weird way. That's okay. That's our joke, but it's still the message comes across.
Yeah. Good for you to move in that direction, and that's what the research says makes us happy and live longer. It's more than medications or food or exercise. The single best predictor of a long, happy life is your relationships. Maybe you've seen some stuff on this, Kevin. There's a 100%. Harvard study, and there's an epidemic of loneliness among men right now, where we've been losing our friendships. I think that's partly related to like work becoming less steady, for layoffs happening more often, so we don't have those work relationships. The pandemic also isolated us a lot, but men don't have as many close friends, even though it was already challenging before. But I think there's a lot of research that it's more natural for us to connect, and that we do get it kind of beat out of us. There's a really interesting scholar at New York University, Naomi Way, who's written a book about how younger guys, they're affectionate until they get to that adolescent period, and then that's sort of like seen as negative, or they're afraid of being accused of being gay, and still there's a lot of homophobia still in society, and so they kind of push each other away, or they become less intimate and close. And I think that that kind of resonates with my experience pretty well. It takes more work to kind of push through that and to get to those places where you can tell each other, I love you, man. As my friend, my co-author has had a men's group for 30 years. It's a wonderful organization. And for several years, they didn't say, I love you. But in this one moment where a guy was sharing what he was going through and he was feeling this great support from the other guys in the room, he finally said, you guys, and it was like the fawn saying I was wrong. I was not right. And finally they say, were you going to say that you loved us? And he's like, yeah, I was going to say I love you guys. And then from then on, they did say they loved each other because it's so hard for us to say that L word and feel comfortable doing it. But it pays off. Just if we want to live long, healthy lives, we need to have strong relationships. And, so I want maybe to come back to this thing about if we only do it with our wives, that is great, but it also is there drawbacks to it. So I appreciate you pushing through to, rekindle, a good friendship.
Yeah, because that feminine masculine connectivity is not, even outside of an intimate relationship, it's not the same. Like it never will be the same because men and women are different. I mean, they just are. And especially way they communicate, women do tend to be more emotionally connected than we are. And so in my experience, but you need to have those male relationships. And I'm in a unique situation. I mean, I work out of my house. I have for like 25 years. I live out in the country. I live in an area that is hunting and fishing oriented, and I'm not a hunter or really, I don't fish anymore.
Okay.
But I'm a car guy. The problem is I live in an area that is not car oriented at all. So most of my friendships are remote. With texting and Zoom calls and, FaceTime and all of that. Those are how I keep up, but I've got friends all over the world. Some of them are closer than others. So it requires me to be more deliberate. Like we're not going to go hang out. I don't have anybody that I go hang out with for 5 or 6 hours, on a Saturday. Normally that's my bride that I do that. We build stuff together and do car stuff and all that. So that's cool. Good. But all that to say is I think I have to be even more deliberate in terms of, showing my feelings and care and taking the time in my case to reach out to those people to make sure they know that they're important to me. And I think ironically, there's so much in the statement to be able to tell somebody that you love them in that way, because it says, I'm connected to you, I value you, I trust you in being able to say this. I genuinely love you and want to have that connection with you. And it's like, as complicated as that can be, those 3 words really say a lot. Like it doesn't having that. And with most of my relationships that I've had that I do have that now, I've kind of tried to be the one to bring it up just, slowly and by text or whatever. But I think that I was just thinking as we were talking that, we don't always have to sit, we're not 2 guys sitting on the front porch talking about our deep-seated feelings all the time. I mean, that can happen, but I think connections, maybe I could be wrong, but I think it seems like with men, just that physical connection makes a big difference, spending time together. And in my case, it's remote, which is great that we have the technology to do that. But I don't know if that's similar to what you guys have seen as you're, doing more of your stuff.
Yeah. I think it's all helpful. I think what you described in terms of the spending time together, and I do that with I'm a big Golden State Warriors basketball fan, and my buddies and I either watch games together or we're texting about them. Sometimes people talk about that as shoulder to shoulder friendship, where you're facing the same direction, maybe watching a car race or a basketball game or maybe playing a game together. And then there's the face-to-face stuff, where it is getting more intimate. And I appreciate that I can, I've been recently dealing with some bouts of anxiety. There's some financial stuff that came up, a surprise tax bill that was way more than I expected as an entrepreneur. I didn't manage that super well. And to my two closest friends here in town, I can talk to both of them about that. They're like, totally get it, and they're sympathetic. They've, been there for me. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle that we're trying to get at when we talk about moving from a confined masculinity to a liberating one. Because just, you don't lose anything necessarily, but you gain so much when you're having a fuller, maxed out masculinity, or
Right.
you've got all the humanity that's possible. And I'll say something that may, be a little, shocking to some readers, but it basically is accepting that there's a feminine and masculine side of everybody. And this is what we kind of would argue, is that we do have within us the ability to be that error. Like we talk about it also, my buddy Jim Young and I talk about it as the arrow in the circle, that masculine symbol on a bathroom. We mostly have been focusing on the arrow, the assertiveness, the purposefulness. We're driven. We're going to be violent if we need to. And the circle, though, that's more, you can say, the more feminine qualities of the reception, the hugging in, like being still and sitting with the moment. And we've kind of ignored that to our own detriment, but if you combine them both, you can still be a guy's guy, and have that deeper, that fuller experience. And that helps those around you too. It's not just that you help yourself, you're going to help your kids, your spouse, your colleagues. A lot gets better when you can kind of embrace that full humanity.
Yeah, because especially if you're repressing what is a natural part of yourself, right? Like you said, we all have emotions. We all want that connection. I think we're wired, everybody, male or female, are wired in a different way, but whether they are male or female, they're wired in a little bit of a different way in how those things manifest themselves. But I think it's super important to realize that it's not just, like you said, the P's, right? Provider, protector, and what was the third?
Procreator,
right? Like we're worth more, which is the arrow, right? So
yeah, there you go. It looks like a penis.
That's right. We're more than that for sure. And to be able to have that and have a fuller life, and to be able to, really embrace more of that as we go along. It's interesting that you say that in the context of men, but I also see it in the context of women too. And I know we're talking to men and this is about men, but in my own experience, my wife is, she was a stay-at-home mom for almost 20 years. And then after that, when the last kid left home, she kind of reinvented herself. I've been a car guy for a long time. She wanted to get out in the shop and do some stuff. And so she and I built a Jeep together, completely took it apart, put it back together a couple of times because it's been wrecked. But she does these off-road rallies, and we do off-road driving and that kind of thing. And as a result, we got involved in kind of the female side of the automotive industry. And she got to do these all-female builds for SEMA, which SEMA is the Special Equipment Manufacturers Association. It's the largest automotive trade show in the world, happens every year. Okay. It's kind of a B2B thing. But the first one that she worked on was 80 different women. And these are tradeswomen. And so to be able to talk to them about doing something that is very traditionally male in their job, but then, and some of them, it's the irony is that some of them really leaned into, and in my mind, for a lot of them, it's an unhealthy thing, but leaned into the masculinity part of what they believed they needed to become in order to be successful and to quote unquote protect themselves.
In other words, they're acting like dicks.
Yeah. they kind of have a chip on their shoulder. Which I mean, I've heard some of the stories. It's really just stupid how some of these men treat, female technicians and welder. I mean, these are welders, auto body painters, car builders, smarter than anybody I know. My wife does welding also and car building and, and also makes these enormous 3D cakes and does pastry and, all this stuff.
Wow.
She's kind of a Renaissance woman, but it was interesting to see how, just like with men, we set aside some of our femininity, what would be more of a feminine kind of side to our, if you want to define it that way. And they also were setting aside their femininity to fit into a male dominated role. And for some of them, it created a lot of conflict. Like, you could just, like, you're miserable because you've decided you're not allowed to be, quote unquote, you're not allowed to be a girl. Right. Like, it's okay. And so I think it was just occurred to me that that's something that we really saw.
That's so interesting to hear. And we see that in the more corporate world that I'm more familiar with, Kevin. Like, a lot of women who have become executives have almost like out masculined the masculine, the men, to be kind of tough and stern, and it's understandable in some ways, because, like you said, some of those technicians have been mistreated by colleagues who are men. Women get penalized if they are too passive, and they also can get penalized if they're too assertive. So they're riding a tightrope. They're walking a tightrope to try to succeed in a lot of these male-oriented cultures, but
I think
penalized for success is
penalized becomes a bit of a pun in this case.
Yes, exactly.
Penile.
Stuck with the air.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's I don't know if that has the same root, but it might.
I just decided it does now.
Very good. Yeah, it works. It works. But I think that this is the what's in front of us. It's hopeful is everybody can be fully human. Let's let the girl mechanics and the all women groups and women just do mechanic stuff if they want to do it. That's what they're drawn to, and let the guys be. We interviewed a guy who became a nurse. Because that's what he just really wanted to do. But for so long, that was like way uncool. Now there's a lot of male nurses, and they do. I had a heart attack 2 years ago, and some of the best nurses were these guys. And they're bringing their physicality to it. They're
try to lift a 300-pound patient off a gurney, right? Yeah.
It's so there's room for, I think, both men and women to be showing up with more full humanity, and it does go both ways, as you're saying.
Yeah, better just those traditional roles and trying to merge those things and trying to, it's the whole meet the Fockers thing, right? Like he told, that was the big joke. Right? That's the big joke, right? Because he was a nurse, not a doctor, and kind of presented himself as if he was a doctor at first, and then they made fun of him and all that. My youngest is a paramedic, and she's a 24-year-old female running her own trucks, because when you're a paramedic, you run the trucks, and she runs the scene, and she's that's a very male dominated, especially because when she comes on a scene of an accident, for example, you have fire department, police department, and the paramedics, EMS. And she's in charge of the scene. The paramedic is in charge of the scene until they figure out whether or not the patient's stable and what to do next and all that. And so she's told me some of the stories about, some of the firemen, can be just dicks about, I mean, first of all, she's a young female, right? And so that helps exacerbate the situation. But, it's really helped me being in these environments. First of all, to have the experience of reverse sexual harassment was really, it's really interesting to be in those groups of women. And some of the things that they say are way worse than any guy that I've been around.
Interesting.
So that, they really have a raunchy side too, but it's really helped me to see, and also just doing these projects with my wife. We're building this huge shop by hand, the two of us. And just to really recognize that, first of all, I'm convinced that women run the world already. I think they just allow us as men to believe and to feel like that we're in charge a lot of the times. But to really see how valuable and strong that women really can be. And I think that's a huge part of, and in that, in that vein, to see what makes them strong and to what makes them more well-rounded than most men, and to kind of, really look to that as a way to, to do our lives also, to do what we need to do.
I appreciate what you're saying. And I think this is part of what we're reckoning with in this, in some ways, to put it in spiritual terms, I don't know if that will resonate with you or your audience, but like there's in some ways the rise of the sacred feminine is underway. Like for a long time, we had, literally most of the faith traditions have had kind of a conception of a male God, and some of that's changing over time. And the Catholic faith has always had like Mary as one of the almost godlike, and that Protestants have criticized that. But just this notion that we're at a more values level, that we're accepting and appreciating the connection. We're appreciating the compassion more. We're seeing the strength of women in these different terrains. Women can, they can do childbirth. It's like amazing. And there's evidence that women live longer than men. Some of that is about our bad behaviors, but there's also some evidence around like they have longer and they can endure in terms of some endurance race type stuff. Anyway, so I think there is we're kind of bringing together the two halves, like the yin yang, that that symbol captured centuries ago, that we're kind of coming back to some of that wisdom, I think.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that from a religious standpoint. I don't consider myself quote unquote religious, but I'm an evangelical Christian. And so the thing that most people miss about Christianity, from an evangelical standpoint, Catholic Christianity and evangelical are kind of a little bit of a separation there, but Jesus was extremely involved in like the women he had women that funded his ministry. Women were more prominent in everything that he did. I mean, they were literally footing the bills to make sure he could do his ministry for the 3 years that he was doing it. And so there's a very strong feminine, obviously Mary, in the Bible stories and all that. So it's like, for to believe that a God of the Bible is, ultra man, old man with a thing, and, is not necessarily he's much more feminine oriented than I think because he just, depending on what you believe and all that, from my belief system, you have a one God that represents men and women. So he has to incorporate everything good and bad of both men and women. So that is interesting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and Martha and Mary. Like they're, as you're saying, all the funding, and also just Jesus himself, that he was about connection and compassion. Like we kind of, there's a lot and incredible courage, right? Like, but it's not the kind of masculinity that we've generally highlighted or emphasized. We were, Jesus wept. This, but we're not supposed to weep. Why is that? Because it kind of, you could say it was misshapen, perhaps, by Catholics have a lot of responsibility there, like with it just being a male-oriented priesthood, and only guys could be the decider of how to interpret the Word of God. But yeah, we talk about Jesus in our book, and most of the faith traditions do have these elements in them, but they haven't always been emphasized.
Right. Yeah. There's a really good series, and the first 2 seasons are Amazon. The other one you have to go to the website /app, but it's called The Chosen. Okay. And what it is, I mean, obviously it's a faith-based series. However, I think if anyone's interested in seeing, in my mind as a believer, as a Christian, it represents everything that I would want Jesus to be. Because he's got his disciples, and that brotherhood and that connection with other men on a level that we don't do now, I think is shown. I like it because he has an irreverence and sarcasm about him, the way that it's written, which
interesting
I have in my personality. So my assumption is that God created humor and sarcasm and all of those things too. And so I'd really, if that's something that, you haven't seen, it's a really interesting, because it's biblical, but it's also they've taken and fictionalized some of the characterization. They've expanded on these characters in a way that is not strictly biblical, but in a really cool way. Whether it be Peter, Peter was kind of the screw up of the Bible. But in this, the way that they've written it is that he's kind of the security guard of the disciples, right? Always trying to keep and making sure all of that's happening. And so it's a really interesting thing. But to your point, Jesus had his 12 disciples, like they literally traveled for 3 years and teaching and bonding and having that experience with each other that was on a, talk about a deeper level. Like we don't have that experience. So I think that's a great example. So what advice would you give to men on kind of like starting this journey towards masculine liberation, as you guys are calling it? Obviously we need to pick up a copy of the book so we can read through it. We'll get the links in a bit, but kind of what are those initial steps that for guys that maybe they don't have a lot of friends, or they're not connecting with their friends, or they're doing all shoulder to shoulder type stuff with no real connection necessarily. And, how would you kind of tell them to get started?
I'm going to suggest you start by connecting to yourself a bit more. And that is to say, even just feel your feelings, and as opposed to immediately kind of suppressing if you're sad or you're angry or you're joyful even, like let yourself feel what you feel, because we've been kind of told to like, we're supposed to push them down, not express that. Even if we just do that to ourselves, if we need a good cry, let it out. If you need to yell and you're angry, go to a park or someplace and let that all go, and just kind of maybe think about what are you really called to do in life right now? Like connecting to your purpose, your soul, you might say. That's a starting point. And I think a good second step might be, what you just described earlier, Kevin, like connect with a friend, and I've done something similar with a bunch of my kind of adolescent childhood friends. Like I've joined a text thread with like 14 Buffalo guys. And a lot of what we talk about is the Buffalo Bills. We also talk about being dads and about, challenges in life, and individually or in the text thread. And those are guys that are typically guys or gals, but like I would suggest trying to deepen some of the male friendships, and going back to those childhood friends often are ones that we can rekindle, and to be brave, to be courageous, like you have been, Kevin, to say, I love you, I really do care. And all that means, I'm not necessarily in a romantic way, but I'm loving you I respect you. I care about you. I trust you. So those are two things. You need to connect to yourself and try to connect to somebody else, especially someone you've already been connected to in the past.
Yeah, it's a little easier than just going to a rant, which is nothing wrong with finding a great men's group to go to, but it's probably easier to reconnect with old relationships, that you have at least some foundation for. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to land the plane. We'll borrow from Micro and his wording, but I really appreciate you taking the time. How do we find you? How do we find access to the books and what you've got going on?
You can find me most easily on LinkedIn, searching for Ed Frauenheim. I also have my website. It's pretty bare bones, but you can learn more about me there too, at edfrauenheim.com. And the book is called Reinventing Masculinity, the Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ed. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.